lecture series this year, organized by the UP Department of Linguistics in partnership with UP Korea Research Center. Before we proceed to the main event, let us acknowledge UP Department of Linguistics Chair, Assistant Professor Francisco Rosario Jr., our faculty members, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Students and alumni present today, thank you so much. And now, without further ado, let us introduce today's speaker. Dr. Thomas Baudinette is a senior lecturer in Global Cultures, School of International Studies, Macquarie University. A cultural anthropologist, his research explores the role popular culture plays in shaping knowledge about gender and sexuality across East and Southeast Asia. His first book is Regimes of Desire, Young Gay Men, Media and Masculinity in Tokyo in 2021. His second book is Boys Love Media in Thailand, Celebrity, Fans, and Transnational Asian Queer Popular Culture in 2023. Thomas is currently working on 3 book projects, an edited collection titled Writing the Thai Wing, Globalising Thai Media, Transnational Fandom, and Soft Power Potentials. The updated English language edition of Akiko, Hori, and Mori Naoko's seminal text, Bionote, BBL textbook. And a monograph, tentatively titled Queer Fantasies of Asia, Japanese and Korean Media Fandom in the Philippines. Dr. Baudinette, the floor is now yours. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Okay, test. Excellent, great. Thank you very much for the wonderful welcome. It's always a genuine pleasure to be visiting here at UP Dilma here with, of course, the UP Korean Research Center. And this is actually my first formal time presenting here at the Department of Linguistics. So it is actually a genuine honor to have been invited, and I thank everyone for making this possible. Today I'm going to be talking about work that I've been doing over a number of years now, close to a decade actually, exploring Japan-Korea relations through the lens of fandom. And I hope that today's presentation, even though I am, as I said, a guest of the Korean Studies program, I do know that certain people here are also from the Japanese Studies program, and I do hope that this presentation can be an interesting lens into thinking through a variety of different questions related to consumer culture, languages, and indeed the kind of relationships between these 2 particular East Asian nation states, Japan and South Korea. So today's presentation is entitled Theorizing the Gender of Transcultural Consumer Districts in Japan, a case study of the linguistic landscape of Shin-Okubo, Koreatown, utilizing, of course, some scare quotes, which I will be unpacking in a little while. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Japan, which I'm pretty sure in this room will be very few of you, but I just want to kind of preface today's presentation. I am looking at consumer districts and consumer culture, so it's always important to think about Japan as what we in kind of Japanese studies, which is traditionally my home discipline, even though I've really branched out over the last few years, as a hyper-consumerist society. So back in the 1990s, just after Japan's major kind of economic miracle and bubble had burst, sociologist John Kaimer rather famously argued that within the hyper-consumerist society of contemporary Japan, and I would say that this is true even of 2026 as it was back in the 1990s, that a culture of mass consumption was indeed the dominating principle of everyday life within Japanese society. Indeed, when we talk about mass consumption, so we're talking about a mass culture dominated through the consumption of goods and services as well as media around mainstream context. We can actually trace this back to the 1600s using the Anno calendar. And indeed, post-war Japan has rather famously been dominated by periods and cycles of booms and busts in their economic development as the market transformed in the wake of World War II. This is most evident if we visit a major city such as Tokyo and visit all of the huge consumer districts that have emerged in this, the world's largest urban conglomeration, in which we see spaces of consumption becoming tied to very specific demographic groups, as well as very specific what Japanese sociologist William Toshi refers to as media tribes, but what we could also rather simplistically refer to as fandoms, fandom cultures. So if we think about these consumer districts carefully, what I always emphasize to my students, and what is going to become important in today's presentation, is not only are these consumer districts that are tied to various different fandoms, but due to the nature of Japan's contemporary media marketplace, the ways in which it is structured in terms of marketing and advertising, these are also highly gendered spaces as well. And today's presentation is going to be looking at this very carefully. So if we think about Tokyo, we have various different consumer districts here, such as, for example, Akihabara, quite famous, I'm sure you know about it, which is tied to the predominantly heterosexual male subculture of the anime, manga, otaku fans. We have Harajuku, famous for its ties to the Gothic Lolita fashion subculture, as well as the female kind of consumption of male idol goods. So Harajuku is a highly feminized space. Likewise, Ikebukuro is a predominantly female space. Ikebukuro has emerged as the women's equivalent to Akihabara. So if you're a fan of BL or shoujo manga, video games, K-pop, J-pop idols, once again, Ikebukuro is the space for you. And as Venus mentioned, my first book was looking at gay consumer districts in Tokyo, and that was actually an ethnography of Shinjuku, which is a queer male nightlife district. So these districts are generally accepted to be gendered consumer spaces, but often this is an impressionistic account. Scholarship is needed to verify this empirically. So today's presentation is all about when I initially put it together for a Japanese studies audience, the idea was to think about how these consumer districts emerge as consumer spaces that are specifically gendered. But because of the nature of the district we're going to be looking at today, it also provides us an opportunity to think about the broader Korean wave. So a term that I will define carefully later, and the ways in which the Korean wave has intersected with the gendered formation of consumer space within Tokyo and Japan to provide an empirical kind of grounding in this, but also to provide what I believe is a model for theorizing what in other scholarship I hope and colleagues have referred to as K-pop spaces. So not just Korean spaces in the concept of migration spaces or consumer districts, but the ways in which the Korean wave and fandom culture has shaped the production of Koreanness in urban society around the globe. So to do this, I'm looking at this quote-unquote Koreatown of Shin-Okubo, specifically focusing on what we call its linguistic landscape. And this is where the linguistics, the sociolinguistics comes into play. Though I would note, I am not a linguist by trade, but I do find certain linguistic methodologies useful when thinking about transcultural, transnational exchange. So for those of you who haven't heard of this concept of linguistic landscapes, basically the linguistic landscape refers to the kind of presence of various different semiotic systems across the lived environment, the material environment, and how this plays a role in creating space. This is a very fancy way of saying we study the language and representational politics of signage across a space in order to make sense of those spaces. So I have an image here from Singapore when I was visiting back in 2025, just to kind of show you a good example of what a linguistic landscape can show us. So here we have some signage in the middle of Singapore that is presented in a variety of different languages. We have it presented in English, we have it presented in Mandarin Chinese, and some signage also in Japanese, which is not a native language of Singapore, or official language that is, and then also Bahasa Melayu, so Malay language as well. For those of you who are not familiar with the kind of linguistic context of Singapore. It's interesting because Singapore has 4 official languages. The 4th one is Tamil, conspicuously absent on this sign. So if we think about what that tells us, so why, for example, is Japanese present here, whereas the national language of Tamil is not, we can analyze the sign to make sense of a variety of different ideologies around language, around culture, around society. So this is what linguistic landscaping allows us to do, and it's the method that I'm going to be drawing on in my discussion with Shin-Okubo. That being said, the study of LLs, as I'm going to call them now, is often tied to studies of multilingualism, and it has traditionally been used as a way to make sense of migration and the emergence of ethnic enclaves and things such as that. And indeed, I've been doing this in the context of the Philippines, as of course has Baesong Zinim, who's been looking at key landscapes in the Philippines. But what's often been the case with regards to linguistic landscape research is that it's often been very quantitative, so it's just about kind of like counting instances of various different national languages, and it often has been very descriptive, not just kind of describing what the linguistic landscape looks like, and then making simple assumptions about, okay, well, there's this language here, so that means that this community group is here and it's catering to that community group. So a lazy and incorrect analysis of this sign would be to look at it and say, oh, there's Japanese. That tells us something about a Japanese community in Singapore. Well, that's not the case. It's there for tourists. It doesn't actually index or indicate the presence of Japanese people at all, except in the context of tourism, because these are major tourist sites. But the unfortunate tendency in linguistic landscape studies has just been to say, oh, look, there's Korean in the Philippines. Oh, this is for Korean migrants, which is lazy. Okay? So a variety of different scholars over the past several years, including myself, have emphasized that we need to do more than this. We need to think in a more sophisticated way about what the kind of semiotic systems on signage can tell us about space. And in particular, I've been interested in saying, okay, so let's look at these signages and the presence of images and language and whatnot, and think about it in the context of gender and sexuality. And I've always been interested in the intersections of linguistic landscapes and actually the study of sexual desire. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So to provide some background for those of you who are unaware, Shin-Okubo actually is this space that doesn't formally exist. So it is a consumer district that has emerged around a station on Tokyo's main trunk line, the Yamanote line, the Yamanote line, and there is a station on that line called JR Shin-Okubo Eki. So New Okubo Station, okay, as opposed to the old Okubo Station, which is up the road. So around this station has emerged a consumer district that is an informal district. It isn't like a local government area. The area is actually called Hyakunincho. And it has been prominent since the kind of mid kind of post-war era as a cheap destination for migrants to live. However, even though it is often called Shin-Okubo Koreatown, or in Japanese, Shin-Okubo no Korean town, it is not an ethnic enclave. Okay? So what I mean by that is that this district isn't actually tied to a long-standing Korean ethnic community. They don't, ethnic Koreans and migrants do not live in Shin-Okubo. That's not what the space is. Instead, it emerged in the 1980s and 1990s as a space to cater to a variety of expat South Koreans who would come to Japan to work and study, and they set up businesses that were catering to these people because many of them were working in the district next door to Shin-Okubo, which is called Kabukicho, majority of them working in sex work or entertainment businesses. So Shin-Okubo has emerged as a space catering to expat Koreans since the late 80s, early 1990s, and was predominantly a hospitality district with food and other sorts of services catered towards an expat Korean community, and it then began to transform since the 2000s into a Korea wave space. So this image here on the sign is a good example of a it's just a Korean restaurant. Those of you up the back, I do apologize if it's not clear, but here we have a Korean restaurant called Macquarie University, which means Macquarie's story. It's a food place. Now, you'll notice that I'm talking about South Korean newcomers, and I'm differentiating Shin-Okubo from so-called Korean enclaves and ethnic communities. This is because Japan actually has a long history. The second largest community, ethnic minority community in Japan, are known as the Zainichi Kankokujin, which means resident Korean communities. And these are the communities who are the descendants of ethnic Koreans who moved to Japan, often forcibly, but not always, during the colonial period, so from the annexation of Korea in 1910 until its liberation in 1945, to kind of reside in Japan to work. And so the Zainichi Korean communities, what we call them, they are the descendants of those who chose to remain after the war. They're in their fourth or fifth generation now, and many of them have actually naturalized and become Japanese citizens, and some of them don't even speak Korean anymore. Okay? But they're still marked as Korean and indeed face significant amounts of discrimination in contemporary Japanese society to this day. So the newcomers that I'm talking about that are tied to Shin-Okubo are South Korean citizens who came to Japan after the normalization of a relationship between the nations in the 1980s. Okay? The Japanese do not consider these South Koreans to be Zainichi, and neither do the Zainichi themselves. They're considered to be a separate community. So if you're curious to learn a little bit more about this district, I want to kind of recommend this paper by my colleague Satoshi Nambu at Monash University, which is where I did my PhD, as well as Linguistic Ono, who is based in Thailand at Macquarie University. So they've done this really interesting comparison of the two sides of Shin-Okubo. If you come out of the station and turn right, you enter the quote-unquote Koreatown. If you turn to the left, you actually enter a district that is predominantly dominated by Vietnamese and South Asian migrants, particularly Muslims. Unfortunately, this article makes that simplistic assumption that the presence of Korean language is indicative of migration, something that I've told Satoshi, a good friend of mine, was wrong, and today I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. So, for those of you who are in the room, I'm sure you know what the Korean wave is. The Korean wave refers to the global spread of Korean popular culture and the subcultures and fandoms that have emerged around consuming various different forms of quote-unquote K-contents, whether that be K-drama, K-pop, Korean cosmetics, Korean food, etc. So today's presentation is thinking about the impacts of the Korean wave on this district of Shin-Okubo. Shin-Okubo would not exist in its present form without the Korean wave. The Korean wave is a form of nation branding. It is a soft power diplomacy kind of project by the Korean state in many ways, but it is also important to recognize that it is also a bottom-up fan practice. So if you think about the Korean wave, since the 1990s, i.e. the period within which Shin-Okubo was beginning to emerge as a quote-unquote Koreatown, we saw the South Korean government under Yong-san adopt a policy known as Seikehwa, globalization, for want of a better translation, that was focusing on exporting Korean content around the world in response to the democratization and liberalization of the Korean economy, as well as the recognition that the Korean consumer market was too constrained in order to make money. And indeed, after the Asian financial crisis and related IMF shock that hit Korea in 1997, leading to massive amounts of economic hardship for the local people, the export of Korean popular culture and contents became essential to growing the Korean economy and bouncing back from that period of hardship. So I often show this slide to my colleague, my students back home. This is K-Content Planet, which was an event hosted by the Korea Creative Content Agency, which is the kind of, it's not technically a government agency, but it is funded through Korean government money to promote various forms of Korean media around the world. So this K-Content Planet was held at the end of 2025 in Sydney, and was about promoting Korean content to local audiences. And similar sorts of events have, of course, occurred in Japan. So the Korean wave in Japan, we can kind of trace it back to the 2000s, and there are two seminal moments that we often view. So one argument is that the Korean wave was initiated by the broadcast of a very, very, very influential Korean drama called Gyeol-ryonga, or Fuyu no Sonata in Japanese, Winter Sonata in English. So this was broadcast first in Japan in 2002, and then it was rebroadcast again in 2003 due to its huge popularity. And in contemporary kind of scholarship on the Korean wave in Japan, we now refer to this as the first Korean wave boom in Japanese society, strongly tied to K-drama fandom. And during this period of time, it was kind of the major consumer was what in Japanese is called the Hallyu, Korean wave, Obasan, aunties, Korean wave aunties. So middle-aged female fans of Korean popular culture. So everything about the Philippines, there's lots of titas who are into K-drama, same demographic. Okay, they were attracted specifically to this kind of notion of what we call in Korean konminam, pretty flower boys who possess a kind of gentle nature and emotionality, a so-called quote-unquote soft masculinity that was more desirable and romantic and indeed sexually attractive than their Japanese husbands and Japanese men's emotionless, technocratic behavior. So this guy, Bae Young-jun, the star of Winter Sonata, emerged as, they called him Yon-sama, Lord Yon in Japan. Even to this day, he's Yon-sama. And when he first came to Japan to meet his fans, he was mobbed at the airport, which is very uncharacteristic of Japanese fans and people at the time. So can you imagine screaming hordes of Japanese titas coming to the airport to kind of meet Yon-sama? So, this is the precursor to mobbing your favorite idols at the airport. Japanese fans don't do this anymore, they're a little bit better behaved. A little bit. But also, at the same time, we also saw the penetration of K-pop, so Korean idol music, into the Japanese market. And whilst it technically occurred slightly before the airing of Winter Sonata, so a singer named Boa from SM Entertainment debuted in Japan also in 2002, slightly before the airing of Winter Sonata. It took a few years until K-pop managed to reach the same level of mainstream awareness and popularity as K-dramas were, but it was really in the late 2000s that we saw K-pop acts become extremely popular and indeed somewhat mainstream in Japan, particularly, as I said, due to this singer Boa, as well as a boy group called TVXQ, and they basically dominated the Oricon charts, the Japanese music charts, and this is outperforming the local idols of Japan. And this was partly due to a strategic relationship between their Korean management company, SM Entertainment, and Japan's premier music distributor, Avex Tracks. And also the fact that they sang in Japanese and were kind of re-debuted within the Japanese market to adjust to the logics of Japanese idol culture in a process we refer to as localization. But perhaps at the height of the second Korean wave boom in Japan, the success of K-pop and its prominence within contemporary Japanese society was indexed by the fact that Korean artists were being invited to perform at the Kohaku Utagassen, the red, white, end of your song contest, that is broadcast every New Year's Eve on NHK, the national broadcaster. But after this, we have backlash. Okay? And this is important because it sets up what happened in Shin-Okubo. So as the popularity of the Korean wave grew in the Japanese context, conservative commentators, right-wing politicians began to agitate against the rising popularity of Korean content in the Japanese media landscape. The first kind of notable example of this was the publication of a manga called Manga Kenkanryu, which means manga hating the Korean wave, which was written by an author, Sunim Yamano Shadin, and it was a bestseller, sold hundreds of thousands of copies in Japan. And it was written by this guy, Yamano, who wanted to quote-unquote debunk the historical misunderstandings being perpetrated by South Korea, and to kind of revise the history and kind of demonstrate how the Japanese people were being hoodwinked by the evil Korean wave to reject like the truth of history, i.e. the fact that Japan didn't kind of create sex slaves in World War II or invade Korea. So from the late 2000s into the early 2010s, we saw a massive backlash against the Korean wave in Japan, huge anti-Korean demonstrations, spewing out all sorts of hate speech across Japanese society, and right-wing nationalists and activists, particularly the emerging alt-right on the social media, basically calling out Japanese broadcasters such as Fuji Television, for instance, for giving excessive airtime to K-dramas and K-pop music. And Japanese media companies, who are always very, very risk-averse, complied. They withdrew the support of the Korean wave, and the Korean wave entered this kind of dark period where things were very, very subcultural. And during this period, we, according to interviews that I did with people in Shin-Okubo, almost 80% of their businesses folded. The district was on the verge of economic collapse due to the culture of Koreaphobia that to this day continues to structure the Japanese-Korea relationship. So, originating out of the right-wing discourse that I've been talking about, that we can trace all the way back to the colonial period and the 19th century. In fact, we can trace it back to the 1500s if you really want to play like lingerie history. We see this kind of attempt to define who the Japanese are and what Japan is by looking down on Korea and positioning Korea as a dangerous other. So we need to think about the rise of Korean wave and space station Shin-Okubo within this context. So the third Korean wave group, in 2016, due to a renewed success of Korean popular culture on the global stage, such as the massive success that groups such as Blackpink and BTS were witnessing in North America, we saw a renewed interest beginning to emerge in Japan in Korean content, particularly K-pop. So if the 2000s and 2010s were dominated by K-dramas, the 2020s are dominated by K-pop fandom. And it was once again through this renewed interest and the uptake of K-pop amongst young women as a form of fandom culture, we see once again K-pop becoming acceptable again and moving back into the mainstream. And it was during this period of time when Shin-Okubo was seeking to economically revitalize that they leaped onto the Korean wave in a big way and completely transformed the district from just a place filled with Korean restaurants to a space that I argue is a K-pop space. And this is particularly due to the rise of something that we refer to as oshikatsu in the Japanese language. So this refers to a particular form of fandom culture that I'll be unpacking in a little while. Okay, so I think that's enough background. Sorry to bore you with all of the socio kind of cultural context. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to explore Shin-Okubo together, exploring its linguistic landscape and thinking about what it means to move through this district. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to join me on a brief walk that I took through the district in January 2024. So this is at the end of having completed 3 months of strong ethnographic fieldwork, visiting the district almost every second or third day as part of a broader project looking at fandom culture in Japan. So we're going to watch a 5-minute video. We're going to watch me walk down a street in Shin-Okubo, which is affectionately referred to as Ikemen Hori. Ikemen, for those who speak Japanese, I think you know what it means. For those of you who don't, Ikemen Hori means hot guy avenue. Why? Because if you walk down Ikemen Hori, you might meet a handsome K-pop idol. And indeed, we will meet one as we watch the video. So, I will provide some commentary, but I just want you to kind of soak it in. Do pay attention to the sounds as well, the sides. It's a little bit maybe So I remind you, this is Japan. It's not Seoul, we're in Turkey. So what's interesting about Shin-Okubo is that it is actually technically a residential district, so you will see occasional kind of just like apartments in the middle of all of these Korean food restaurants. We also see plenty of makeup restaurants, like makeup stores, so Kankoku seminal 10. So that is a K-beauty specialist shop. Here we have a kind of samguk, as we call it here. So it's a Korean barbecue place. Here we have Honey Namchin Cafe. You will meet this place a little bit later. But if you know what namchin means in Korea, this is boyfriend cafe in Korean Media. So, as I said, I will show you. I used to visit namchin cafe quite a bit. So here we have some K-pop stars walking up and down the street at the end of Ikemen Hori. So these are the Ikemen. At the end of Ikemen Hori is a venue, a live venue called Showbox, where you can go and see performances by rookie Korean idols who are training in Japan in hopes of debuting in Korea. They never do that. Some more kind of street food culture. So you get all of the famous Korean street food, gilgori toast, those weird potato things. Here's some more. So take a brief break, walk past someone's apartment. I bet you, like, what a terrible thought. I was going to notice that the vast majority of the crowd moving through are young women, which is a good indication of the kind of space. You'll occasionally see a few tourists, such as myself. That's because this is a cheap place to find like Airbnbs and cheap rentals and hostels, even to this day. So, you know, if you're interested in visiting Tokyo and you're a K-pop fan, this is a good place to stay. Some more fandom junk. This purple shop called Magic Shop. For those of you who are BTS fans, this is a store dedicated to selling BTS-related fandom merch. So it's not just K-pop goods, but you'll find stores catering even to specific groups. Stray Kids is also very popular at the time when I was there. This is my favorite store. So here's if you want to get your Enhypen gacha. So I used to come here because at the time I was a big fan of the boys, for them. And this is their official slate, so you get their official merch. So I used to come to that store a lot. So this is at the time when new jeans were super popular, so it's like So this is interesting. So this place was visited by Namjoon, RM from BTS. So it's like, this is where you took the photo, so you can take the photo too. So connecting this restaurant to K-pop fandom, and then next door are some more kind of, this is the height of the Tang boom, which at that point in time in Japan was kind of tied very strongly to K-pop, even though it comes from China. Some more gacha, some more Korean cosmetics, and then what I definitely want to end this on, I always love this guy. This is the Macquarie man. It's a Macquarie. And then at the very end of the road, after you get your Macquarie, I mean this isn't normal, there's a whole bunch of stores that are designed to make like fan-produced merch. And then at the very end, he's a Don Quixote. Donkey. But what's great about this donkey, which is in here, is that it's a Korean-themed donkey. Even though it's in Japan, it is a Korean-themed Don Quixote, and its main sign, which I didn't take in the video unfortunately, is written in Hangul. Why? Because Shin-Okubo is where you go for K-pop nonsense. Okay, so let's thank you, brother. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this space. So, as you would have seen, thank you. So this is the image that I put on the advertising for this talk, and you can see, so we have underneath, we have Idol Park, which is like, it sells like photo cards, fans and merch, albums, magazines, all sorts of mostly unofficial, somewhat unofficial, fan merchandise that is designed to cater to one's desire for K-pop fandom. Okay? And on the top of that is a tteokbokki and buldak specialty restaurant. Okay? But if you look at the buldak restaurant, up the front you have a whole bunch of like posts, banners celebrating BTS and their anniversary, because I was there during a period of time that was kind of like they were hangovers from Festa, for those of you who are BTS fans. So what's interesting here is that you have a Korean restaurant and a K-pop merch store, but they bleed into each other. Okay? In like even like when you go to a K-pop restaurant, like a Korean restaurant here in the Philippines, you'll often be playing some K-pop in the background and same sort of tactic. But in Shin-Okubo, it is hardcore. So if we go to another Korean restaurant that I visited with a colleague of mine from Ateneo de Manila, this is the BTS corner. Okay? So if you're able to kind of book the BTS themed table that you can eat along with your Korean barbecue. And then if you look on the left, it actually has twice. So it's technically BTS and twice together. I don't know if putting them together causes some kind of disturbance in the universe. But what was disappointingly, I wasn't allowed to eat at the BTS table because it was just two of us. Apparently it needed to be, you had to have 4. But this is very, very common in Shin-Okubo. The point is that you're not just going here to eat Korean food, because there's Korean restaurants all over Tokyo, but you're going to eat Korean food within a context that is tied to your K-pop fandom. So if you are an ARMY, you want to sit at the BTS table, take photos, maybe take out your photo cards or your other merch. And the point is that this isn't just about Koreanness. Korean food, K-food is being conspicuously and deliberately tied to K-pop and its fandom culture, incentivizing fans to visit the district and engage with the district as a K-pop space. So this is an example of something that is important. Remember I told you about the backlash. Remember I told you about 80% of businesses in Shin-Okubo folding or facing financial difficulties due to the backlash that emerged against the Korean wave in the late 2010s. Early 2010s. When the third Korean wave boom hit Japan, the Shin-Okubo Shinkokai, so the promotional committee for Shin-Okubo, all of the businesses coming together to kind of develop the district, made a very conscious choice. In order to revitalize our district and rebuild our financial base, we will reposition and remarket ourselves to cater specifically to K-pop fans. So not only were they kind of thinking, there wasn't this idea of like, the dominant market that they are catering to is Japanese fans of K-pop, not Korean migrants. Okay? Japanese fans of K-pop. That's why all of the signage is in Japanese. The Korean that is in the signage, which there is, so if you look at the video, very little Korean signage, maybe a little bit for colour, to kind of give a vibe of Koreanness. But it's not just being led, of course, by the owners of the stores. Naturally, as well, the fans themselves also participate in the production of this linguistic landscape. Those of you who are K-pop fans are probably well aware of the concept of like a birthday cafe, or like engaging in the circulation of fan-made goods in order to celebrate fandom and celebrate one's kind of favorite idols. So when I was doing my field work at the end of 2023, I was there during Taekam or V from BTS's birthday. So I visited Shin-Okubo on the day of his birthday in 2023, and basically every single store had some kind of tie-in with a fan club or a fan community who was producing some form of celebration. You go in, you buy a drink, you get a cup sleeve, you get a fan-made something. You visit the BTS-themed restaurant, which is unofficial, so don't let Hype know. But you could go and take a photo in the special V corner. Look, they even have a birthday cake in the shape of his Pomeranian puppy, Yonta, right? So basically, the fans and collaborating with the businesses also focuses on this kind of relationship between the quote-unquote Koreatown and K-pop fandom for economic purposes, but doing all of this transformed Shin-Okubo into a K-pop space. What do I mean by that? So the district is awash with all of these semiotic callbacks to K-pop, its fandom culture, the idols. None of this is official, but in so doing, visiting Shin-Okubo itself becomes an act of fandom. Engaging with the space allows you to both consciously, celebrate. So if you're a fan of BTS, you go to the BTS-themed cafe on V's birthday and take some photos and whatnot. It's a very conscious choice. But you can also randomly just encounter K-pop. Remember listening to the soundscape of Ikemendori, Hawkeye Avenue. K-pop is blasting out of all of these stores. You can bump into rookie Korean men who have come to Japan to train as idols. Consuming the district, participating in its consumer culture, is to consume K-pop. And it's K-pop specifically, as I've already mentioned. Now, yes, I've got Mr. Tax Evasion here on the slide. But in the context of Japan, this is about him being Astro, not as an actor. I like Chone. That was a joke. But what's important about the sense of Koreanness being produced in this linguistic landscape is that this isn't just a simple case of like Korean restaurant, Korean language sign. This is a space for Koreans, and it's tied to Koreanness as a national project. Shin-Okubo ties a sense of Koreanness specifically to fandom culture. This is a K-pop space because the Koreanness that operates here indexes fandom and participates in the broader practice known, as I've already said, as oshikatsu, that defines contemporary Japanese fandom culture. So what is this oshikatsu? Let's talk now specifically about the gendering. So I've shown you how the space is a K-pop space. Now I want to show you how this K-pop space is specifically tied to satisfying a normative consumer that the district and the linguistic landscape itself produces and the production of this normative consumer is a heterosexual woman. Okay? Heterosexual Japanese woman. Okay? So oshikatsu is a new form, or a new name for a long-standing practice within Japanese idol culture. So this is a quote from an article of mine that came out at the end of last year that was kind of specifically trying to make sense of what oshikatsu is. Oshikatsu literally translates into activities designed to push your faith. Okay? So I'm just going to read this quote out to you. The term oshikatsu requires careful definition. The word oshi, deriving from the verb osu, to push, is often approached as if it is a synonym for the adjective suki, which means liked or preferred, and is sometimes thus erroneously translated as a fan's favorite idol. Sometimes it's also considered to be a synonym of the English slang term bias within the context of quote-unquote stan culture. However, while it is certainly the case that an oshi is the idol who represents the ultimate focus of a fan's affections, the term's meaning, grounded in its original meaning of push, more accurately refers to an idol whose career a fan seeks to actively develop and promote through their fandom practices. The fan practices of promotion in which fans engage around their oshi typically involves conspicuous consumer practices which have become to be termed oshikatsu or pushing one's idol. Consumer practices designed to support one's oshi as an active investment into idols for the purposes of visibilizing their presence to the mainstream public, as well as contributing to their popularity in other ways. Okay, so how does oshikatsu manifest within the context of Shin-Okubo? Well, simply put, Shin-Okubo is where you go to get your fandom merch. So, for example, there are so many stores that are selling photo cards. In Japan, important is what we call the fan, so it's got a uchiwa, and like it has the face of your idol on a fan. Pen lights, light sticks, all sorts of like a blanket, what in Japanese is called dakimakura, hugging pillow. On the right, we even have a K-beauty store where you go in and it's just filled with like standees of your favorite idols. So this is so on the left, these are 17. So we have official photo cards, these ones are, for 17, the boy band. On the right, we have Taeyong from NCT 127. And you know, it's a store selling particular, thank you. A store selling, a store selling particular kind of Nature Republic. They have a tie-in with NCT. So you go and buy your cosmetics at this store, and then you get like extra fan merch. This is oshikatsu, and then you hang it on your bag so everyone can see that it's your favorite idol. Who's like looking at everyone, kind of thing. Like, I know. I'll show you my bag because I have mine up there too. So this is oshikatsu, designed to conspicuously show off who you like. But then by participating, so this store is buying official photo cards, so the money goes to the idol, as opposed to, well, goes to the idol. But like, they're official, as opposed to the unofficial merch stores I showed you earlier. Okay? So this is just, anyone could do this, I do this, right? But the way it's structured and promoted in Shin-Okubo is highly gendered, okay? So, I'm going to show you how this becomes gendered. So here we have, from an unofficial merch store, you can buy these lovely things. So the sign says, Oshi to issho datta node oishikatta, watashi dake chū suru. Translated into English, it's delicious because I was together with my oshi. It is a kiss just for me. Okay? And the way that it is structured and promoted is that it is always a male idol, never a female idol.
And then the logic is that it is for a female consumer to buy. So they're not catering to heterosexual men who may be interested in female idols. They're not catering to gay men who may be interested in male idols, or lesbian or sapphic women who are interested in female idols. And then this will become clearer as we move through the rest of the examples. Now, I told you that I would take you to Namchin Cafe, right? So the reason I like Namchin Cafe, it's not just an average cafe. It provides a very specific service. If I go to Namchin Cafe, I can get them to print a photo of my favorite idol on the top of my cup. So my one is the one down the bottom. It says Younghun from The Boys. And then I can consume him. Actually, there's a whole kind of like art, like you put your straw in and you drink it in a way that doesn't ruin the picture. Okay? Like there's like a whole thing. But what's important once again is that this is structured as a highly feminized space. It is Namchin Cafe. And as it says here, Namchini equals kareshi. Daijoubu, mou samishiku nai yo. Anata no koyubito, namchini desu. Namchin means boyfriend. Don't worry, you won't be alone anymore. Your boyfriend, Namchini, is here. And then next to it, it says, Tamshine dun dun jae konbe, which is a famous line from a Korean drama. An oppa addressing his favorite girl. And then here we have a photo from inside the store. I need to get close so I can read it, because you probably can't see this. So it's Sessan Oton Gotto Noboda Arun Dachiana. Compared to all the flowers in the world, nothing is more beautiful. Highly, highly, highly romantically charged. Once again, built towards a female audience. When I was there in January 2024, as I moved through the space, the whole district was covered in ads for a drama called I Love You. Thank you.
Which, oh god, starred, what's his name? Che Jun-tap. So a Korean actor in a relationship with a Japanese woman. And so once again, the whole district was flooded with ads for a drama focusing on an kind of intercultural relationship between a Korean man and a Japanese woman. I love this. Up the top it has here, I don't know if you can see this, but in katakana, it says, Annyeong haseyo. Annyeong haseyo. But it's written in katakana because the idea is that he's actually addressing a Japanese person. Okay? But this becomes even more hardcore. When I was there in October 2023, the district was plastered with these ads. 素敵な韓国の男性と出会えるナンバーワン韓国人男性とのマッチングアプリ. It's a dating app designed specifically to connect Japanese women with 素敵な韓国の男性, wonderful Korean men. So once again, the linguistic mindset, the district is awash with media that is structuring the desire. The person who is supposed to be consuming all this media, the normative reader of the district, is a heterosexual Japanese woman. It gets even better. So I mentioned to you previously that Shin-Okubo is next door to a district called Kabukicho, which is a sex entertainment district. Kabukicho is famous for one particular business: host clubs. So those of you who are familiar with Japanese society are probably aware of the tradition known as host clubs, where women can go and pay to be entertained by attractive men who then extort massive amounts of money from them. I encountered this ad in Shin-Okubo for a host club. It's not in Shin-Okubo, but it's a host club that's near Shin-Okubo. So in the top, this is an ad that they run across the district, And its catchphrase is Shokugyo Ikemen. My job is to be a hot guy. Okay? But only in Shin-Okubo does it say Jigok Minam, which is a not very good translation. And what is really interesting, so here we have one of them is like called Kota, this guy here. You probably can't read this, but it says Moto YG Entertainment. So he used to be a trainee at YG Entertainment. So you can date someone who used to be a K-pop trainee. Of course he's Korean. Or maybe the Ninki YouTuber Wataru is more your speaker. But in Shin-Okubo, actually, there are hotspots. K-pop cafe and bar, Astro. K-pop boys bar, Astro. K-pop boys bar, Dokepi. So, for 60 minutes at 2,000 yen, you can pay to both drink all you want and sing all you want, it's a karaoke bar, with a handsome Korean guy. And I can tell you, based on my research and interviews, if you slip a little bit extra, he'll give you some certain other services as well. Don't ask me how I know. So you can see very clearly that if you pay attention to the linguistic landscape of Shin-Okubo, not only is it a K-pop space, but it is a space within which the desires of heterosexual women have become quote-unquote naturalized. This means that all of the markers of Koreanness within the space are kind of tied to and entangled with this gendered notion of consumption in Japan, which I remind you is the norm within Japanese consumer districts, particularly in Tokyo. So Shin-Okubo is just another consumer district in Japan that has a normative gendered clientele. But what's important is that it shows us how Koreanness and the Korean way is also specifically gendered in the Japanese context, for better or worse. So Shin-Okubo is transformed into a district that is specifically geared to satisfying the desires of a heterosexual female audience as mediated through the transcultural spread of the Korean way. Let me see this. It happens in Manila too. So, this is from 2024. It's the Duncan on Katakura. When Duncan had a tie-in with Enhypen. So I always talk about this in the context of the book that I'm writing, Queer Fantasies of Asia, Japanese and Korean Media Fandom in the Philippines. I have a section of a chapter that I call An Engine's Exploration of Manila, because I'm a fan of Enhypen. So I would come here and, take some photos with my Sangun and Jake photo cards. Nothing like Duncan. I was also here for Samu's birthday. So I went to Duncan and bought the special tie-in mint chocolate donut because Samu likes mint chocolate. If you go there now, it's all Bionote and TXT. There's a long tradition of Duncan, an American franchise that markets itself as Pasulobong ng Bayan, of engaging with Korean content. They're not the only brand. Bench did it. And then whilst I was here to give a talk at the first K Culture Conference, I was graciously invited by Bay Something to talk at this first ever investigation of K culture in the Philippines. I was one of the keynote speakers. But at the same time as delivering that lecture, Enhypen was at Araneta Coliseum for their fun meet. And as much as I love being here and meeting all of the wonderful students and scholars, I really wanted to be in Enhypen land with my fellow engine, where the streets of Manila had been completely transformed into a K-pop space. what sorts of gendered identities are being circulated in the Philippines. This is something I'm still thinking about. However, I have been looking at a specific subset of fans, LGBTQ plus Filipinos who engage in K-pop. And indeed, I presented on this work looking at the role of fantasies of Koreanness and K-pop fandom culture in shaping local queer communities and cultures. And if you're interested to learn a little bit more about this, the most recent edition of Hanpil, a special contribution based on the lecture I gave in 2024, you can find. So this discussion of Shin-Okubo and the notion of the K-pop space, its gendered and sexual logics, I hope you can appreciate, isn't just useful for understanding Japan-Korea relations, isn't just useful for thinking about how consumer districts are structured in the context of Japanese consumer society. It also allows us to think about and theorize how the circulation of Korean media and Korean popular culture and the spread of fandom for the Korean wave is increasingly shaping fantasies and romantic desires, as well as sexual desires, within various cultures around the world, including here in the Philippines. So this is where I'm going to end it. I made a few mentions to a BTS-themed cafe in Shin-Okubo, which I'm not going to give you the details to because it's very much illegal. But I did go there. So thank you very much for listening. I welcome any questions and discussions that we have in the remaining time. So,
So we just open the Q&A session. So anyone who wants to ask a question, please just raise your hand. So I will just circulate the microphone. Okay, I think we can start from the first to raise hand.
I don't like this photo, so
Hello. I'm Cheska, first year in BA Linguistics. Sorry. So I've actually been following like your research and stuff for a couple of years now. So it's kind of surreal that you're here and I heard you present live. So wow, amazing.
I'm here too many. I'm here all the time.
So the first question that I have is, okay, so as a linguistics major, we're also going to do like a field work, though for more linguistics than anthropology, which is your background. So I also wanted to ask like how you go about it really, and like especially because you had a focus on linguistic landscapes, like what do you pay attention to and how do you just do it, and also like of course you have fluency in the languages of the areas you do field work in. So it's also like, how do you go about that and stuff? My second question is, I was wondering, actually two things, like, oh my god, sorry.
I don't bite.
Okay, sorry. I saw like this research paper that was published recently that, of course, you wrote something about the feminist potentials of oshikatsu. Was this research like related to that fieldwork that you did in Shin-Okubo?
Yes.
And then lastly, Shin-Okubo, what you argued as it's a K-pop space thing, yeah. But in Japan, there are like groups from companies that are like pseudo-Korean. So there's like J-pop groups, they are classified as J-pop, but because of the Koreophobia, blah blah blah, and they're under like K-pop companies such as JYP, what else? HYBE, such as like for HYBE as N-Team, and then for JYP needs you. Yeah. And then there are also like if you're familiar with Lapone, I don't know if you know them, like CG and I'm 70%. And then 30% Shin-Okubo, like the entertainment company. Do you see these in like Shin-Okubo, these groups, or is it primarily for K-pop? So thank you.
Thank you for wonderful questions. I'm glad that I have 45 minutes. Thank you so much for the very kind words about engaging with my work. That's really wonderful. I'm very touched. So let's talk methods. So I've been visiting Shin-Okubo first in the context as a fan. I mean, I'm a fan. It's very clear I'm a fan. Since 2009, right? So right since the moment of the kind of first Korean wave boom, back when it was just like a place that you would go and get like kimchi chicken. Like, you know, that's all it was. It's nothing special. None of this K-pop stuff was there. It was just a place you could go to get Korean food that was authentic as opposed to the crap that you usually get in Japan. But I made a concerted effort to start studying Shin-Okubo around 2013, 2014 when I was doing my PhD in Shinjuku Nichome, the gay district, which is also quite close by. And I used to come here as a place to relax and unwind, but also in the context of the work I was doing around gay men, media consumption and desire, I was encountering K-pop fans who were gay men. And then we would come together to Shin-Okubo. And some of the arguments I make around gender, and I published about this previously, was about how uncomfortable these Japanese gay men felt coming to Shin-Okubo in order to celebrate their fandom and their desires for K-pop idols in a space which was heavily gendered and very heteronormative. So I won't go into too much depth around that. I've published on it. The articles are available online. I make all of my stuff free and accessible through my personal website, so don't worry about paywalls. But how did I do this project? With camera in hand, over many years of visiting, photos of the space, photos of the signs. So you've been seeing the photos I'm showing you here are the kind of nice ones that are designed for presentation. But the hundreds and hundreds of photos I've been taking of the space, including going right up and taking photos of the signs, and then sitting with them and analyzing them through various forms of kind of multimodal analysis from the perspective of an ethnographer. So these analyses are not done in isolation. They're conducted through reflections on my broader observations of the space, as well as my use of fan interviews, interviews with the owners of stores, interviews with the promotional committee, etc., as well as what are known as strolling interviews, so moving together with fans through the district and talking about the spaces, talking about the signs, pointing out and saying, what does this mean? What do you think about that? What's this? I used that method also when I was studying Shinjuku Nichome, that gay district, where I also looked at the linguistic landscape. When it comes to that multimodal analysis, it's not just that simple kind of cataloging, I don't make that simple assumption, oh, there's Korean here. Tick. I kind of submit the data to a more sustained inquiry, grounded in my commitment to transcultural approaches to research and feminist and queer methodologies. So the reading is grounded in ethnography, participant observation interviews, specific interviews about what the signs mean and how people read them and interpret them. A long-standing, a long-developed understanding of the consumer culture and district linkage, and learned from fans over a decade. So everything that I presented here is grounded in that sort of empirical analysis, that sort of bottom-up analysis. So I don't go into the space with the assumption presence of language equals X. I go into the space, chart what the space looks like, how it feels, how it sounds, how it tastes. And then think, okay, through that bottom-up assumption, through that bottom-up approach where I make no assumptions, I allow the data I have gathered, triangulated across various different data points, to tell me a story. I make sense of the signage through connecting it to the ethnography, through connecting it to the fan interviews, through connecting it to the broader history of the Korean wave and the broader history of Shin-Okubo. My understanding of consumer culture in Japan. So it's not this is what I mean when I say it's not descriptive. I'm not just looking at what there is and then describing it. I'm using what is there to make an argument about the nature of what this space can tell us about various different things. I would say that yes, this is part and parcel of the broader work I do about the feminist potentials of fandom. I skipped over a slide where I was going to unpack that. And if people are interested, I can talk through that slide. The last question you asked was about what I call JK pop. So no, you can't find the Lapone kind of like groups here. So no I&I, none of these groups, right? The other ones, I like I&I. So they're not there, right? They're only available in Ikebukuro and Harajuku because that's J-pop. Okay, but it's also K-pop, but not here. Nijiu is, and Team might be. I haven't seen them since they debuted in Korea, but the point is Nijiu is there because they debuted in Korea. So it's messy, but it's mostly K-pop idols. But then at the flip side of that, I'm a fan of NCT, I'm a fan of Rise. I go there, I can get my Shoto, I can get my Utah, right? So because yeah, I mean, and as a fan of Thai media, because I'm a Thai media scholar as well, I can get my Chen, I can get my Lisa, I can get my Bang Bang, right? So it's Korean, that's why it's a K-pop space, not a Korean space. Because K-pop star like Shotaro from Rise, he's Japanese, but he's active in the Korean media industry and he's a K-pop idol. So it's a K-pop space. These JK groups, or Nexi, for instance, from JYP, that's J-pop-ish. It's because they're ambiguous, they're not there. It's also a market. You can't sell them to these, because the girls who go here, that's not what they consume. I hope that answered all your questions. Thank you.
Great. Yes. Hey Tom, it's me, Dave from Ateneo Sociology and Anthropology, the faculty, and I'd like to ask two questions. So thank you for the talk. The first one is you were talking about the anti-Korean wave movement. So, and would you also consider it kind of gendered as well? Because I've heard of discourses, for instance, from straight Japanese men who were hating on the Korean wave because they felt sort of jealousy against Korean men or so. And also just wondering, I'm not sure if this might be within the scope, but I do remember something. I remember accompanying a friend. We were going to Singapore because he wanted to watch the Twice concert. And when I just came over to see how he was doing, and that entire space got turned into a space for heterosexual straight men. So yeah, it was really interesting for me to see that because, I stereotypically when it comes to K-pop, for me as a queer fan, I like both boy groups and girl groups. It was interesting for me to see a space where it was mostly straight men, which I didn't really expect, but I know since Twice, Twice is super popular among the straight men. Were you able to cover something like that in your research in Japan? Was there a specific part of Tokyo that had mostly these straight men K-pop fans? Because you were mostly covering on straight women and queer fans of K-pop and shit.
Okay. Okay, Hitman, give me the egg. So it's saying that. No, so yeah, like so Akihabara, you can kind of get because Akihabara is also where you get like idol K-pop idol groups like AKB48 and all of that for the dudes. So yeah, they have the K-pop stuff there as well. I didn't really specifically focus on it because the project was looking specifically at the feminist potentials of fandom, so I was specifically focusing on women's consumer culture, whether they be straight or heterosexual women, you know, whatever. Because of course there's work I've done and then thinking that I've done, like what if you're a queer woman moving through the space, you're just as alienated as the gay men that I've spoken about previously. Because it's like Shin-Okubo, if you look at all of the examples that I've been showing with Shin-Okubo, it's male idols, right? Yes, the female idols are there as well. Like remember there was that twice corner, but it really, like that's a minority. This is it's straight girls and their desires for their, you know, beloved opas. So male idols. So I don't really have any data to talk about straight males' basis of consumption beyond, as I said, I was curious. I went to Akihabara once. I hate Akihabara, so I try not to. That's not me being anti-anime manga. It's just I used to live near there, and it's just filled with filthy tourists. Anyway, so it's just me being xenophobic. So I was just kind of curious. Oh, is the straight boy heaven got some K-pop? Ah, yeah, it does. But at the same time, I bought like a really rare Mark NCT photo card there, so whatever. K-pop, there's some work I did with a former student of mine that talks about the ways in which the K-pop fandom more broadly is kind of tied to women's consumer spaces and women's consumer culture in Japan. So K-pop is extraordinarily gendered in the Japanese context to be a female consumer culture, both in the top down and the bottom, like top down and bottom up. So in many ways, actually, the heterosexual male fan is just as alienated in some regards, though it pains me to admit it, as certain other consumer groups. With regards to that broader hating the Korean wave, yes, it's intimately tied to misogyny. So some of what I was looking at and thinking about is indeed this kind of culture of like, the hate speech that used to circulate in the early 2010s, and that is beginning to resurface under the prime ministership of Takaichi Sanae and the rise of Sanseijo, where we're seeing a resurgence of hate speech against immigrant groups and Chinese and Korean communities in Japan right now. It's all about like these dumb women falling for all of these evil, handsome Korean men. Ken Kanri was written because there are so many dumb women who need to, fix the way they think about the world. So it's always the anti-Korean wave discourse is always intimately tied to misogyny. Indeed, mainstream society in Japan, like most societies around the world, participates in the broad pathologization of fandom, and the positioning of fandom culture is delusional, dangerous, and antisocial. And that's always kind of tied to tropes of the crazy fangirl. And that's true of Japan as much as it is Australia, where I come from, the Philippines. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, hello. I see you again. Yeah. First of all, big that probably tied to the previous question. Because I was kind of wondering, especially in the later third gen, fourth gen K-pop, like the likes of Twice, for example, who has 3 prominent Japanese tattooos. And then you also have like Kisele as Aizo, Sakura, Tomi, and Naoko, which came from popular K-pop groups to begin with. How did that contribute to the rise, to the resurgence? Any speculation on the inclusions of high-profile Japanese members in high-profile groups, kind of like contributed to the resurgence of K-pop consumption in Japan. And how do they compare to their Korean co-members in these groups in terms of the consumption that we see in K-pop spaces in Japan?
That's a good question. Thank you, Eric. So it's immensely important in the third Korean wave boom. If you watch the Kohaku Utakase now, all the Korean girl groups, New Jeans, Twice, Always, aespa. So I was in Japan in 2000 and something. It was in the early 2020s, or I can't remember which year, maybe 2019. And Twice were invited to appear on the Kohaku Utakase and the Red Light Song Contest. The first Korean act to be invited since TVXQ in 2009. So it was a big deal. And it was Twice, and it was specifically because of the Japanese members. Now, obviously, that is no longer as important as that once was, but the resurgence of particularly amongst, once again, these heterosexual male fans that have been alluded to, the presence of Japanese national members in K-pop girl groups, aespa, Twice, the most famously, has been an issue as well, has been really, really, really important to the kind of return of K-pop to the world of kind of Japanese media marketplace. And indeed, you'll notice now, it used to be back in the late 2010s and early 2020s that like Korean entertainment companies would always be focusing on making sure there were Chinese members in the group, and like the fifth generation, like the fourth generation was always, the third generation was always unique to the Chinese market. The fifth generation has emerged now, except maybe for Hyde, because Hyde's too obsessed with North America. But SM, JYP, YG, there's always a Korean, a Japanese member in a K-pop boy group and K-pop girl group now, like from the major companies, and that's because Japan is now a really significant market here. So the presence of Japanese members is important. It's very interesting because there was a time when I was doing fieldwork in Shin-Okubo, talking to the consumers there, maybe about 2015, 2016, 2014, 2015. And I was talking about NCT, because I was getting into NCT at the time, and everyone hated Yuba, who's the Japanese member. I hated it. I was like, why is it a Japanese member? We don't like Japanese guys. The whole point of K-pop is Korean guys, right? Whereas now, which NCT subunit was most successful in Japan last year? Wavy. The Chinese market, like the one that was produced for the Chinese market. It doesn't have a Japanese member, but also like doesn't have a Korean member. So you can see, and now like people love Yuga, right? He debuted in a solo career in Japan last year, and that's really interesting to me. And I like Yuga, so maybe cost. But like there was some at that point in time, just before the resurgence of the Korean wave in 2016, there was this kind of distaste for the Japanese members amongst Japanese fans. But that's gone now. That was a very specific moment. I don't know if that answers your question, Eric, but it's the best I can do.
Hello po, Rohan. I'm a Ling minor student here. So, actually, I have two small questions. The first one is related to what Sir said, but the second one to Sir Dave. So, my first question was, what was, from your knowledge, what was the impact of the PD48 project in K-pop consumption in Japan, like specifically PD48, because it was so interesting because they kind of like, it was a direct comparison of both of the idol culture in both countries. And then the second one would be, is this specific market very overlapping with like fujoshis in Japan?
Okay. So the latter one is no. And the reason I bring that up just very quickly is in Japan, I talked about the split between genders, right? So the one way we split the market in Japan is along gender lines. Media for men and media for women that do not interact. The other thing is what we call in the Japanese between the distinction between 2D and 3D. Right? So if you're a consumer of 2D, i.e. anime manga culture, you're not a consumer of 3D. You're not into idols. The reverse. I always say to my students, because a lot of my students are like, when I'm engaging in Japanese languages education, so well, anime manga fans, because that's normal outside Japan. And then they get very disappointed with me because I'm like, I don't watch anime. I don't like manga. I'm part of the 3D world. I consume idols. I like 3D. I like dramas. That's what I like. So those things don't interact. Now, yes, there's a shipping culture that is part and parcel of K-pop fandom in Japan, but shipping and media are very different things. So yes, in Japan, shipping is called either kapuringu, or my favorite term is namamono, which means raw stuff. Pun intended. So they don't interact. And indeed, BL is tied to the world of Akiko, which is on the other side of the city. There's no shipping stuff in Shin-Okubo. It's not out in New York. The other question is, what is the relationship between AKB48 and K-pop consumption? Is that what it was? Or Produce 48, okay. I mean, so as Eric was saying, the group that emerged out of Produce 48, iZone, became popular and it had members from, AKB and so forth. They weren't, iZone, it was a K-pop group, so it was popular amongst K-pop fans. Did the members of, did the people who follow the 48 groups engage with iZone in Japan? No, because it's a different thing. So even though that was, there's that, I don't know, you clearly know your AKB48 and your Produce 48, so you may remember, at the time there was this viral clip that was going around, just seeing all of these poor Japanese idols breaking down at the strictness of kind of K-pop idol training, K-pop idol life. And that's very, there's a distinction between J-pop idol, Japanese idol culture and Korean idol culture. Whilst they have relation, they're related historically, K-pop is indeed a response to J-pop in terms of its production, if we look at it historically, but culturally they're very different. What we are seeing now with the rise of those JK groups, Produce 101, Japan Season 1, 2, etc., as well as a variety of other audition programs, is we are seeing a K-popification of idol culture in Japan, for want of a better word. We can see this in the aesthetics of recently debuted idol groups. We can see it in the transformation of Japan's largest male idol production company, formerly known as Thomas and Associates, now known as Star 2 Entertainment, who, since the debut of Travis Japan, every other group has been, the current group is very popular called Snowman, they had to up their game in terms of performance, in terms of skills, and aesthetically and musically, there has been a deviation away from the classic. And I can tell you this with authority because I work as a consultant to Star 2 Entertainment, and I've had conversations. They're very aware of the challenge that K-pop plays in the market. It has been less important in girls' female idol culture in Japan because that is a world of its own. And the aesthetic, if you want to talk about the most virulently anti-K-pop people in the Japanese market space, it's female idol otakus in Japan. And that's also because there's the Venn diagram connecting otaku culture to right-wing conservatism in Japan, so that's... This is why I don't like anime.
Hello, I'm Marco from Department of Art Studies. I would just like to ask if you would consider the Koreatown as exploitative as it preys on the K-pop fantasies of
No.
women in the form of consumerism or reclamation of gender identity and space that makes it more empowering and emancipatory for the women.
Thank you. So the latter.
So this allows me to now talk about that slide I skipped over that the first question also talked about. So my whole point is like if we do some kind of Theodore Adorno-esque culture industries analysis, you know, the guy who famously says that jazz was going to ruin the world, we're sliding into very lazy analysis. So I believe that Shin-Okubo is an empowering space, and it's a space replete with feminist potential. Fandom culture is empowering. Consumer culture, if we kind of follow some kind of lazy, and I use the word lazy very deliberately, orthodox Marxist critique to make sense of all of this, then you're just not a very good scholar. Why? Because you're just importing theory that was generated out of mid-19th century Germany to 21st century Japan. That's not good scholarship. So why do I believe that there is a feminist potential in Shin-Okubo? Why do I make the case that female fandom culture and the consumption of idols is empowering and politically important? For a variety of different reasons. First of all, if you move through the space of Tokyo, it's a highly heteropatriarchal space. Japanese cityscapes, in Tokyo in particular, is a space that is dominated by the politics of the male gaze and the silencing of the desires, both romantic and sexual, of women. A space like Shin-Okubo reverses this. It allows for the female gaze, which is often either denied or sublimated to the needs and requirements of heteropatriarchal masculinity, to become the normative gaze. So whilst, yes, one could argue that by creating a fantasy space tied to the romanticization of Korean men, it promotes consumerism, and consumerism is always already bad, which is something I don't agree with. To make that argument neglects the socio-cultural context of Japan within which women's desires are denied, even within mainstream media. So yes, the Shin-Okubo Promotion Committee, in order to revive their industry, revive their district, made a conscious decision to cater towards heterosexual women and their desires for K-pop. That doesn't mean it doesn't empower those women who visit there. If you think about the broader socio-political context of living in Japan as a woman, which is not easy. So it's a space within which women's desires become normalized, which is not typical of consumer culture anywhere. I mean, how central and normalized do the women in the room feel their own desires, aspirations, and hopes and dreams are within the Philippines? Probably not very, unless you're a good Maria Clara. I also argue that their agency is potentially enhanced. Consumer culture is something people engage with consciously. The idea of the passive consumer is, as I said, indicated in Adorno-esque theory, doesn't bear out when we look at people ethnographically. And if an ethnographer encounters someone who says, I'm a fan and I find this meaningful, and then I just fall into the lazy kind of analysis of, well, you've clearly been duped by a consumer culture that has produced false consciousness and it's alienated you from your human nature. Okay, Carl. It's lazy. Oshikatsu is also important because this is not, something I didn't get a lot of time to talk about today, is that it's not an individualistic activity. This is a collective identity. Shin-Okubo exists as a space because of the solidarities and activities that fans do together within a space. If you remember the video I showed you, it was young women walking hand in hand together
to visit the stores, participate in fandom, freak out over their favourite bands, their favourite groups, maybe follow some hot Korean guy down the road. Why not? And also, within the context of contemporary Japan, within which women's political and social agency is highly constrained, and when consumer culture is one of the only spaces within which women have the opportunity to express themselves, I think that we need to actually recognize that it can be empowering because the women have the power, indeed any consumer has the power to take what is given to us by a culture industry, what has been given to us by a producer of media, and transform it into something meaningful. One of the clear interventions made in the middle of the 20th century by the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies in reaction against the orthodox Marxist approach to consumer culture was to remind us that structures do not always fully constrain us. An individual has the power. Agency, human agency cannot be diminished. An individual can always choose to consume counter to the norms that the society has produced. So, a good example of this are the queer men and women who go to Shin-Okubo, and yes, they feel uncomfortable by the space that is catering to and normalizing a heterosexual desire, but by being in the space, occupying. When I go to, so the photo I showed you of Nanjini Cafe, where we all had our favorite biases, 3 men in a space that was created for heterosexual women. We were staking claims to the fact that we can have boyfriends too. It's going to think that we're more beautiful than any flower in the world. So I hope this answers your question, and I apologize for coming on very strong, but I find this to be a really, really unproductive way of thinking about fandom culture. And indeed, the article that I wrote that was alluded to earlier was my direct challenge to this.
I just check if students have any questions. No more questions, so I will give microphone to Eric.
No, let me react to that as well in that question. And I'm coming from the capitalist organizational theory here, because probably one extension I already thought about with this one is even if you look at the composition of fan clubs here in the Philippines, most of the people who are in leadership positions are women. I'm part of a fan club myself. I'm an admin for a local fan club for Kyōkasho. So, and our boss is a girl, a female, half my age. Yeah, so, yeah, I also feel strongly, I echo what Professor Tom said regarding that particular sentiment. Because even if in my interactions as well with people who are self-organizing these events, and I'm not just talking about the membership in terms of the percentage of women, gay, or men in it, but also those who are in leadership positions. Most of the if you look at the fan clubs here, most of the people who are in leadership positions are either members of the LGBTQA community or female. And the men are reduced to the people who are doing literally doing the heavy lifting. They're not in a position to negotiate. They're not included in the meetings when we do the meetings with the producers, with the partners, with that. And simply put, because there's also from a scholarly perspective, females are more adept in organizing, planning, and whatnot compared to males. And this is more prevalent in K-pop fandoms, which for the most part are self-funded, self-organized. If you go through the details of all of this, a lot of them are female. So there's no, and this is another example where you can see all of these fan spaces and how females are actually empowered into such a degree that they give out orders They strategize. They're the ones who strategize. They do. So again, and I apologize. It's also if I feel strongly about it. They were strongly about this. But yeah, indeed, it's a very lazy. It's a very isolated sense. To me, it's probably also like an insult for my bosses. Okay, within the fandom.
For those who don't know, Prof. is the dean of the law, business school, right? So in his academic world, elite, but the world of K-pop fandom. He's there to carry the boxes. But I just want to kind of reflect on, to kind of build on what my colleague was saying here. That here we have, these are all turning SM Alaneta policy in hyphen land around a fan meeting that, yes, was sponsored by Dunkin' Donuts. But these are all fan projects, predominantly organized by, as we indicate, women or members of the LGBT, gay men, queer men, putting all of these fancy, handsome Korean boys throughout the landscape of the heteronormative Philippines. Empowering, transformative, queer, I argue, in my scholarship. So I believe that fandom is not some kind of dupe. It is an active space of political intervention. Unless you're deluded. Okay.
Amen. All right. So, thank you very much, Dr. Tom, for your speech. And for our audience, if you're interested in reading more about Dr. Tom's piece, there's a recently released book that we published under UPKRC last December. This is Handwheel Volume 8, and it's here. So, Dr. Tom's special contribution is named Exploring Korean Fantasies in Contemporary Philippine LGBTQ+ cultures from queer expression to political activism. So if you're interested, it's free online. You can search up on the official KRC Facebook page and read it.
Give it a read so you can know why gay men in the Philippines are obsessed with mean juice armpits.
Yeah, it's a good read. It's a good read. So